When the SMS arrived, I was arranging the supper table, breathing evenly and with steady hands. There was no reason for me to suspect anything, no cause for my entire universe to collapse in a single, thoughtless instant. But there it was, brilliant letters looking back at me. She needs our support. I'm moving in with her. Already emptied our joint account. Ha. When I called my son down for dinner, neither my voice nor my fingers faltered. The slow, methodical way I put my phone down was the only indication that my 14-year married husband had just ruined our marriage. The words weighed heavily on my chest as I gazed at them. She, like I didn't already know who he was referring to. Then there was another text. She's pregnant, Sophia. We have to be there for her. I know this is a lot to take in, but we can be adults about this. Expecting a child. My youngster was humming in the background, but it was drowned out by a piercing, deafening ringing that filled my ears. I made myself breathe in and out and maintain my composure. Emily, my sister, I am 9 years younger than you, the family's baby. After our mother passed away, I essentially raised the girl. James, too, my spouse. The man I had a life with, trusted, and loved. I had been too blind, too trusting to notice that they had been writing their own tale behind my back for years. My son's naive voice kept everything appearing to be normal as my body worked automatically to arrange the table and fill the air with the aroma of roasted chicken, as if my whole existence hadn't suddenly fallen apart. I took up my phone once more. Congratulations! That was my response. Not much more. Not rage, not pleading, nor yelling. That's all. James was going to be quite disappointed if he believed that I would break down, that I would get down on my knees and plead for an explanation. There had been signs. I could see them now with dazzling clarity. The late hours spent at work, the unexpected outpourings of kindness toward Emily, like moving in with her and continuously checking in on her. Not every brother-in-law is as supportive as James, you know, Emily said with a laugh. And I had never questioned it, foolish as I was. For what reason would I? Your family won't turn on you. Until they do. The truth is, though, I wasn't broken. I had already gotten ahead by 2 steps. Because I had discovered something 3 months prior. James had a small, unimportant piece of paper in his jacket pocket, a receipt from a hotel. He had vowed to be out with buddies for a night. That was the foundation's first crack. I didn't go up to him. I did something better, oops. I got ready. I was sitting at my laptop, silently transferring my savings to a different account while James was out working late. The joint account? I left just enough so he wouldn't suspect me. When I looked through our credit card accounts, I saw the proof that had always been there: more hotel rooms, jewelry, and flowers. An affair was suspected by me. However, I could never have imagined this in my wildest dreams. James believed he had won now. He had ensured his future by draining our money, that he might abandon our life as if it were a worn-out clothing he no longer desired. He didn't know. The cash he believed he had stolen, it was little compared to what I had managed to get. The house he believed he was entitled to, my name was on it. It has always been. The future he believed he had robbed me of, he couldn't take it. I had poured myself a glass of wine that evening after putting my son to bed. James had been keeping the pricey wine for a special occasion. This felt appropriate enough. It buzzed on my phone. I know this is hard for you, but Emily is young. She was scared. It just happened. We never meant for it to go this far. Please don't make this ugly. I chuckled. Unpleasant? Did he believe I was the one causing this unsightliness? After taking a leisurely sip, I forwarded the message to my lawyer, whom I had discreetly hired 2 months prior. I typed my response after that. I understand. You're right. She needs your support. Take care of her. I waited after that. Awaited James's realization that he had just stepped into a trap. As he reveled in his new life, enjoying the radiance of his affair-turned-family, he was unaware that by the time he discovered, it would be too late already. I got up early the following morning and stretched in a bed that felt a lot larger and emptier. The area next to me was chilly and uninhabited. Excellent. I quietly made my way around the house after sliding out of bed. The floor was streaked with gold as sunlight came in through the curtains. Everything had the same appearance. My son's backpack was waiting for another school day at the entrance, and the kitchen had a coffee-like smell. as if my entire world hadn't just fallen apart the previous evening. However, it had. However, it wasn't me who had to scramble. As I packed Liam's lunch, I made sure my hands were steady. He finally asked the question I had been anticipating as I was closing his lunchbox. "Where is Dad?" I grinned. "Be calm," measured, managed. He needed to go assist Aunt Emily and do something. It wasn't false. Not at all. Liam shrugged without giving it any thought. He was too busy making sure he didn't forget his schoolwork to grab his backpack. He didn't have to be aware of the specifics. Not quite yet. I picked up my phone and called him as soon as he left the house. "It's time," I informed my attorney. This was what she had been anticipating. First, freeze every shared account. James believed he had spent all of our money. I had already transferred everything that was important, but he was unaware of it. Step 2, keep him from entering the house. I was the owner of the house. It has always been. Last year, James used kind words about security and our future to try to persuade me to sign the deed with his name. I had dismissed it. "We'll handle it later," I told him. Later was never now. The locksmith showed up in less than an hour. I watched from the door as James's hands rendered our house keys worthless. The divorce papers were submitted at lunchtime. Adultery. Unambiguous. No gaps. James has yet to get in touch. He might have assumed I was processing. Perhaps he assumed I was sobbing while curled up in bed somewhere. Perhaps he believed he could spend a little more time playing at home with Emily before he had to deal with me. I gave him that delusion. For the time being, the initial cracks show up. My phone buzzed in the middle of the afternoon as I was looking through legal documents. "Emily." I paused. Then I responded. "Sophia." She spoke in a little frail voice. "I feel guilty. Don't hate me, please." I pressed my fingers to my temple and inhaled slowly. "Emily, I don't hate you. That was the reality. I didn't despise her. I felt sorry for her." She was clueless about the situation she had found herself in. She sniffed. "James said you told him to look after me. Does that imply that you pardon us?" It nearly made me chuckle. Pardon me? James had cultivated her, persuaded her that he was the man she needed, a sort of savior. He was still sleeping next to me every night, whispering lovely promises to her. He was her concern now. "Obviously," I said with ease. "You'll see in due time." She paused. I wanted to speak with you before someone else told you." I remained silent. "Simply wait," she replied, her voice breaking. "James wants to move into my apartment, but it's so tiny." "Maybe we could," he said. It was there. Taking responsibility had never been part of James's true goal. He had thought he could return to my home, bring Emily along, and claim it was support. I suppressed a smile. "Thank you so much for calling," I said to her. "However, I fear James will not be able to return here." Silence for a beat. "What are you saying?" I looked at the recently styled hair. "He no longer resides here, after all." Her breath caught. She was unaware. She had never been informed by James that the house belonged to me, that he wasn't entitled to it. She turned aside when I heard her shuffle the phone. Then a whisper, muffled. "What does she mean, James?" It was just what I could imagine. James froze, his face contorted. At that point, I hung up. James acknowledges the reality. James finally texted me a few hours later. "Sophia, what the devil, have you replaced the locks?" I waited for him. Minutes later, there was another message. "This is not possible for you. I must return and retrieve my belongings." "You're exaggerating. My belongings. Not our property. His belongings." I was amused by the bravado. I typed back, "Oh, the locks weren't changed by me. The home's owner took action." Quiet. And then his phone rang. I choose to disregard it. One more text. "You're making things more difficult than they need to be." I grinned. I ran my fingers across the keyboard. "No, James. I'm making things just as difficult as they have to be." Liam poses difficult questions. Liam pushed food around his plate as he sat at the dinner table that night. His tiny brows knitted. "Is Daddy having dinner at home?" I knelt next to him and brushed a lock of hair away from his face. "Daddy is spending some time with Aunt Emily." He furrowed his brow. "Why? How much should a 12-year-old be told? How do you convey betrayal to them without making them feel sad?" I kissed him on the forehead. "And when they do, they have to live with the consequences. And sometimes adults make bad choices." He pondered that for a while. Then he gave a nod. All right. As simple as that. All right, just one word, 1,000 interpretations. The start of the end, James sent one final message that evening. We must speak. I switched off my phone. Because he needed me. For the first time in our marriage. Furthermore, I was no longer following his regulations. This was only the start. James had always thought he was above the law, knowing there would be no repercussions if he lied, cheated, or took something that wasn't really his. That illusion would be shattered tomorrow, and I would relish every moment of it. The kitchen countertops were warmed by the morning sunlight streaming in through the window. As coffee brewed behind me, I stood at the sink and let the water trickle between my fingers, adding a somewhat comforting scent to the air. But my thinking was incredibly acute. James hadn't texted back yet. He waited, holding out for me to lose it, silently collecting the parts and welding them back together. He was unaware that I had cracked months earlier. When I was finished, I had changed into something he would never recognize. I took a cautious drink of my coffee while looking through my phone. He didn't leave any messages. I pondered how long he had been staring at his screen the previous evening, anticipating my call, plea, or outburst, awaiting the woman he believed he had shattered. He continued to portray me as I had been for 14 years, the woman who made concessions, showed forgiveness, and went above and beyond to maintain the family's unity. I was no longer that person. That initial call came in at 8:12 a.m. I allowed it to ring. I could already picture him by the second ring. His cheeks flushed, his phone clasped in one hand, repeatedly checking his financial app. I was fully aware of what he was observing. Pennies. Minutes later, the text arrived. You froze the accounts? How could you? Emily and I need that money. In fact, I burst out laughing. He wasn't inquiring. He made demands, like I had a debt to him, as though he still owned the life he discarded. I didn't respond. One more call, directly to voicemail. Panic was starting to set in at this point. My lawyer called at 10 in the morning. James's lawyer contacted me. She stated in a clear voice, he says that by freezing the accounts, you did something malicious. I grinned while sipping my coffee, maliciously. Did you let them know that I did it lawfully? She laughed quietly and contentedly. Obviously, and that he never owned the house in the first place. That appeared to be unexpected to him. Give him a surprise. James had always exuded such confidence that he was certain he could crush me. He had assumed that I would always forgive him, which was the foundation of this whole situation. He never once gave thought to what would occur if I didn't. Emily called at noon. I nearly didn't respond, but my curiosity won out. She spoke haltingly. Please, Sophia, just have a conversation with him. I said nothing. He was unaware that you would accomplish all of this. He pondered. He assumed you would comprehend. You get it? He had taken my life, set it on fire, and then demanded that I give him the ashes. Emily, what did he anticipate happening? Quietly, I inquired. That if he became bored, I would let him play house with you and then come running? Her breath caught. A baby is on the way. I don't have that problem. Quiet. Then there was the crack. He informed me. He assured me we would be all right, that he would handle everything. Oh, it was there. Before it came time to cash in on his promises, James had always been a man of them. James finally arrived around 3 p.m. Before I could see him, I heard the knock. Just enough to glimpse his face, but not enough to let him in. I cracked open the door. He had a terrible appearance. Unwashed hair and bloodshot eyes. He had always been so confident and polished. No more. You replaced the locks. I folded my arms and rested against the doorframe. I didn't. The proprietor did. He tightened his jaw. Don't do this, Sophia. I gave a slow, cruel smile. James, I'm not doing anything. This is what you did. I'm simply ensuring that you can live with it. He glanced over my shoulder and into the house, the one he had thought would always be there. His safety net, his contingency plan. No more. His voice was lowered as he tried again. Emily and I require a place to stay. She is expecting a child. Despite my stomach churning, I kept my composure. I questioned whether he was even aware of how frequently he used the phrase we need. We, as though his mess still included me. I don't have that problem. His expression stiffened. You are penalizing us. I chuckled to myself. No, James. You're getting exactly what you deserve from me. His breath was foul and scorching as he leaned closer. I am entitled to certain rights. With a honey-like voice, I cocked my head. Do you? Because all you have, as far as I can tell, is regret. I began to shut the door. It was his final attempt. I spent 14 years as your spouse. With my hand still on the knob, I hesitated. And you wasted everything for a brief affair with my sister. He winced. I can't just be thrown out like garbage. I'm not. I grinned more broadly. I'm going to leave you right where you left off. I poured myself another glass of wine that evening. The pricey bottle. The one he had been keeping for a noteworthy event. This felt appropriate enough. On the table, my phone buzzed. James texted me again. We must speak. Without responding, I switched off the phone. Now he needed me. However, I was no longer following his rules. The fissures were rapidly developing by the following morning. My attorney gave me another call. His lawyer is inquiring about mediation already. I grinned. That implies he has no other options. They'll most likely make a settlement offer. Let them make the offer. Emily called again at 4 p.m. Her voice was low this time. Broken. He went out. I blinked. What? James. He simply left. He claimed that he needed time to reflect. I let her words sink in while I gazed at the wall. Once more, he had done it. Like he had abandoned me, he had abandoned her. The sole distinction was, I had anticipated it. I waited for a long moment before responding. You understand how it feels now. I hung up after that. James was officially homeless by evening. His accounts were frozen. He used up all of his credit. Each bridge was destroyed by fire. He was scurrying and grabbing for something, but all he could find was air. I took a slow drink of my wine while I watched the sun set outside my living room window. To fit into his life, I had shrunk for years. Without me, I was now seeing him fade into nothingness. The living room was covered in long shadows as the early sun bathed the sky in gentle amber stripes. Cradling my coffee in both hands, I sat near the window and allowed the silence to seep into my bones. The calm that follows a storm yet has the odor of something darker on the horizon was an odd kind of calm. I had faith that James would return. Men in a desperate situation always return to the areas they set on fire. The first call arrived by 9:00 a.m. unknown figure. I wrung it out. A few seconds later, the voicemail buzzed in, but I ignored it. It would say something I already knew. I apologize. Let's have a conversation. You are missed. James had never been a surprise. He was the kind of man who only felt regret for his decisions when they eventually began to cost him money. Emily called again around lunchtime. This time, I responded. The edges of her voice were fractured and strained. Sophia, he's gone. He departed this morning. I traced the rim of my coffee cup with one finger while leaning back against the chair. I understand. The line crackled with a trembling breath. I'm not sure what to do. I'm being threatened with eviction by the landlord. There is nowhere for me to go. The final syllable caused her voice to break. I let the weight of it descend upon me and closed my eyes. Emily was like a second mother to me. She was fed, clothed, and shielded from the outside world by me. And still without blinking, she had slashed a knife through my back. Something small and broken inside of me still wanted to reach out. She was still trying to mend the things she had broken. However, months of treachery buried that woman. I owed her nothing. Softly, I said, "You'll figure it out." As I did, James eventually returned at 3:00 p.m. Before I saw him, I heard the knock loud, irate fists banging on the wood. I barely opened the door enough to catch a glimpse of him, but not enough to let him in. His eyes were bloodshot and hollow, his hair was oily, and his beard darkened his jawline. He looked worse than before. He was disintegrating more quickly than I had anticipated. "Give me access." He spoke in a low, menacing voice, as if he still believed he could scare me. I folded my arms and rested against the doorframe. "No." His nose wrinkled. "Stop it, Sophia. We must speak." I pretended to think as I cocked my head. "Speak?" I repeated. "When you moved in with my sister and depleted our money account, was that what you were doing? Or was it something else?" He winced but got back up fast. "We did something wrong." I nearly burst out laughing at him. "An error." Men like James always gravitated toward that word, as if it could condense months of deception, treachery, and devastation into a tiny enough item to be forgiven. No, James, I muttered. You made a decision. He glanced behind me, attempting to get a glimpse of the house, which he had presumed would be waiting for him at all times. I was aware of his search. The safety net. Dinner on the burner. Heated. The laundry is just folded. He would always leave his messes unclean, but she would always clean them up. However, that woman had left. The lock he was unable to open, and the icy quiet where his name formerly belonged, were all that remained. Emily is expecting, he said, as if the words would somehow comfort me. I can't abandon her in this manner. I grinned. It's funny that you didn't seem to mind leaving her this morning. He tightened his jaw. When I was smarter than him, he detested it. Your sister is her. I spoke sharply and quietly, leaning slightly in. Before you fucked her, you ought to have considered that. Despite his red face, he remained silent. He was unable to. Rather, he changed his strategy the same old thing. I'll defend this house. In fact, I laughed. All okay. Get a lawyer. Oh, hold on. I grinned. I take it you can't afford one? At his sides, his hands clenched into fists. You're having fun with this. I didn't blink as I looked into his eyes. I am, I said. My lawyer gave me another update by 5:00 p.m. Mediation is being pushed by James's lawyer. Translation, his alternatives are dwindling. While I saw the sun set, I said, let him push. I refuse to settle. Another SMS arrived at 7:00 p.m. Sophia, you got your point. Let's handle this like grown-ups. Please allow me to return until I resolve the issue. With my thumb lingering above the keyboard, I gazed at the message. I then typed back, you have to figure things out for yourself, and put a stop to his number. I poured another glass of wine that evening and sat by the window to watch the lights on the other side of the street flicker. James was jumping from couch to sofa somewhere out there, burning through what little sympathy he still had. He had been underestimating me for years. It was I who was witnessing his drowning now. What's the best part? I didn't need to touch him at all. The consequences of his own decisions were weighing him down. Emily's number appeared on my screen one final time at midnight. I wrung it out. I just heard muted sobbing when I accessed the voicemail. I apologize, Sophia. I was unaware. Please respond. I didn't listen to the others before deleting it. Both of them had constructed their kingdoms upon me, and now I was seeing it fall apart, one brick at a time. Option by option, betrayal by treachery. The sun was brighter in the morning than it had been for months. I smiled warmly at my staff as I entered my boutique, the tiny hobby James used to make fun of. Sales had never been better. I had already started looking at potential sites for a second business. As it happens, anger isn't the best form of retaliation. It is flourishing. My lawyer called with the final documents around lunchtime. The divorce was finalized. The accounts were put on hold. I owned the house. James had nothing. No cash, no house, no safety net. Additionally, I had everything. 3 weeks. It took that long for James to ultimately vanish. He was couch surfing, staying at inexpensive hotels, and burning through favors more quickly than he ever burned through our money, according to the rumors that had begun to circulate among common friends. He was not wanted for very long. Now he was poisonous. His funds? Lost. His credit? Maxed out. What will happen to him? Arrived dead. His entire life had been based on the idea that I would always be there, the lady who waited silently in the background, keeping everything together while he fled after every egotistical desire. He had never thought about what would happen if I just left. The SMS message arrived at midday. Unknown number. I apologize, Sophia. Please, can we have a conversation? While idly swirling my coffee, I gazed at the message for a considerable amount of time. He had slammed the door shut on his own, but he was still attempting to play me, trying to open it. That message would have destroyed me at one point. Just to give him another chance to harm me, I would have been pacing the floor, writing and deleting comments, and fracturing myself in two. However, that woman had left. Rather, I texted back 2 straightforward words. Thank you, but no. It was 3:00 p.m. when Emily called. I responded just out of morbid curiosity. She hardly raised her voice above a whisper. He's not here, Sophia. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee enveloped me like armor as I reclined in my chair. Where? A trembling breath. I'm not sure. He simply walked away. He went after taking the little cash we had left. He uttered. He claimed to need room. Space. It was the same justification he had offered each time I had urged him to exert a little more effort. I had often pleaded with him to defend us. James wasn't trying to find room. Freedom was what he sought. I let her sit in the silence for a long time without saying anything, allowing her to experience what it was like to be the lady who was abandoned. At last, I said, Emily, what do you want me to do? As if she hadn't anticipated that inquiry, her breath caught. I'm not sure. Maybe, I thought, perhaps you might assist. I interrupted her. I was helpful. I told you. I didn't feel anything, but her sniffles could be heard over the receiver. Not sympathy, not compassion. Clad in borrowed adoration and stolen promises, she had stepped next to him and set fire to all we had created together, believing she would escape unharmed. At last, the fire had spread to her feet, and she discovered to her surprise just how badly it burned. I answered icily, Emily, you made your decision. You have to live with it now. I had already forgotten about her by the time I hung up. I went through my boutique that night, the tiny enterprise James had made fun of for years. Sales were booming. His voice used to linger, but as customers came and went, their laughter filled the room. The elements of myself that I had previously given to him, my desire, my patience, and my boundless capacity for forgiveness, were used to build every inch of this sanctuary. He had referred to it as a pastime. It was my empire now. My lawyer gave me a call at 6 o'clock. The divorce is final. You own the accounts. You own the house. He attempted to challenge the settlement. The judge threw it out. I traced the edge of my wine glass and grinned into the receiver. Give him another chance. I poured myself another glass of wine around nightfall, the final bottle from the assortment James had always kept for special events. I took a leisurely sip, relishing each drop. It was a unique occasion. One final voicemail arrived at 10:00 p.m. JAMEs. I didn't even pay attention. I just erased it. I learned that James was living out of his car the following morning. No work, no cash, no house. He had lost everything, not because I had taken it away from him, but because he gave it all up as soon as he believed he could exchange me for something simpler and younger. All I had done was what he had never thought I could do. I turned to leave. Months passed. Like a ghost haunting the areas where he once mattered, James vanished into the background. Rumor had it that he would spend days in the same clothing, crash with friends, and beg for unpayable favors. Emily? She remained. For a time, however, James, meanwhile, wasn't made to carry someone. He eventually abandoned her as well, pregnant and by herself. She never got back to me. I opened my second boutique by spring. I had brought on 3 new staff members by the summer. By autumn, I was organizing a third site. James was standing across the street from my store the last time I saw him. His clothes were crumpled, his face was pale, and his eyes were focused on the life he had discarded. He stayed outside. My name wasn't called out by him. He simply stood and observed. When he stared at me now, I wondered what he saw. He had underestimated the woman? He had betrayed a woman? Or the woman who, using the debris he left behind, had constructed a whole kingdom? I failed to wave. I didn't grin. I just changed the door sign to closed and left without turning around. He had staked everything on the idea that I would be waiting for him at all times. He didn't think about what would happen if I started saving myself instead. Retaliation, as they say, is best enjoyed cold. However, I discovered something far more valuable watching the people who deceived you suffocate on the ashes of the fire they set is what revenge is.